Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 59 of Keeping Water. In this week's episode, I'm going to be talking about my plans for the next couple of years, what I'm thinking of doing and why. After that, I'll talk a little bit about the rudd, which have really been the success of the pond this year. I've now moved past 350 subscribers, which is awesome. I'm still aiming for the 500 mark, and plans continue for a giveaway at that point to say thank you to all of you who have supported the channel and all the future people who will join. Not saying what it will be, but I will just say that there'll be more than one winner. If you're not yet subscribed, please consider giving the channel a go. I'd be really grateful. If you are already subscribed, thank you again, and if you could help me some more by either liking or disliking, I don't mind which, either helps me make the channel better, or by sharing the channel to other people you think might enjoy it. Without seeming negative, summer's nearly over. There's the odd leaf appearing in the pond, and the growth of the marginal plants is slowing down. But although it's nice when the sun is bright and the fish are active and hungry, all seasons in the pond have their positive aspects and their challenges. There's not one season, there's many. The fish keep going and there's always something to do. Therefore, the channel continues 52 weeks a year, and I hope you stick with it too. Right, housekeeping done. Time to start with a look at my plans for the pond. I'm guessing I'm not alone, but I spend a lot of time planning the future of the pond. Things I need to do, things I'd like to do, and things I'll probably never afford to do. But after a year where I tried a fair amount of ideas, some which worked, some that didn't, I feel it's important to plan more realistically. Additionally, I think it's important that the plans have some coherence, by which I mean that each idea contributes to an overall goal. I've therefore decided on some short-term goals, things I'll get done this year, some medium-term ones that I'll do in 2022, and longer-term plans for 2023. When I go through them, you may think they could all be done in 6 months, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But there's two pretty important reasons why I'm not attempting them that quickly. Firstly, money. They're not hugely expensive, but balance in life is good, and there's other things to spend money on. Secondly, and I will talk about this a little more in this episode and over the next few months, I'm aiming for stability. However beneficial ideas you have may be, I think it's important to not change too much too quickly and lose a stable, consistent system and processes. Right, let's start with the short-term plans. What I'm doing in what's left of 2021. First, autumn preparation. If you've followed my channel for a while, you'll maybe know that autumn is one of the trickier times for my pond. There's lots of plant life both in and around my pond that die back in autumn, much ending up in the water. But even more significantly than that is this delightful tree whose leaves appear to go nowhere but our garden, and most of that in the pond. I've tried a number of ways of dealing with them, using a net and doing weekly or daily scooping of leaves out, or using a pond vac to remove leaves once they've sunk to the bottom. The best way, however, has been to cover the pond. Initial attempts were imperfect, mainly due to how fine the netting needs to be to stop leaves getting in. Last year went well, but having two nets joined together still wasn't perfect. Plus, I put it on a little late. This year, I've got a larger one-piece fine net cover, and I have some other plans to reduce the workload, all of which I'll show in a future episode. Usually in autumn, I net and measure the fish. Generally, it's a useful exercise to both check for any issues before winter and to get an idea of the fish's growth over the previous 12 months. However, this year, after all their health problems, I'm going to give it a miss to spare them the stress of netting and wait until autumn 2022 before I next measure their growth. Secondly, new fish. Probably the most exciting event left this year will be the arrival of 2 new carp. I don't have an exact date as it will depend on when the fishery harvests, but probably late autumn, early winter. They'll be quite large, around 50 centimetres, and as I don't have a large enough quarantine option, they'll be going straight into the pond. This might seem like a less than great move, especially considering the probable cause of the current fish's health problems was the introduction of the crucian carp. However, their size gives me little choice, and more importantly, I have more faith in the fishery I'm getting them from. I'm really looking forward to seeing how their addition to the pond affects the behaviour of the current carp, although obviously we'll not see that fully until next year, as they'll all be slowing down for winter when we get them. Finally, winter preparation. The first job of which will be cutting back the plants, removing any dead or dying stems for all of them, and cutting back the irises to water level. This year, in a change from previous years when I've tended to leave them alone, I will be separating the irises a bit, as they're overgrowing the baskets and becoming a little fragile in them as a result, and, even for me, a little messy. What I'll do with the spare ones I'm not sure. I don't really have any gaps, but I do know some people who might want them, so it might be a new home for them. Next, I'll be looking at insulation of the exposed pipework in the shed. I won't be using what I used last year, as it was a nightmare to fix, especially in the confines of my shed, so I'll be looking for an easier option. I'll also be looking for options to insulate the multi-bay and moving bed. Again, the previous one wasn't great, also not helped by limited space, so I'd welcome any suggestions. The next winter job is to clear up any detritus in the pond and give the pump a clean. All of that means getting in the pond, and as the water temps will already be quite low, it should be fun. Incidentally, I also have a plan to attach the pump cable to the pipework to keep it hidden and tidy once and for all, so I'll get that done then too. Just as an aside, I'm not going to move the fry indoors over winter. That may seem harsh, but I'm going to let nature take its course a little with them, and anyway, they're hardier than they look. Finally, I have no heating on my pond, and I don't cover it permanently during winter. However, I do cover it with tarpaulin when I know there'll either be heavy rain, hail or snow during the colder days, as they can all lower the water temperature too rapidly for the fish to adapt to. In a future episode, I will talk a little about my approach to winter and water temps in general, some of which is based on science, some out of necessity. I'll film the fish throughout winter, covered or not. I find it interesting how they behave, interact and look for food even on the coldest of days. I'm really hoping for a straightforward winter. One of the consistent type of issues in previous years was electrics, but having replaced the connections last winter, I'm hoping that won't be an issue this year. Right, that's 2021 done. On to 2022. The first plan of 2022 is, probably annoyingly, a secret. This is partly as it will be, I think, quite exciting, and also because it's still not utterly certain. It will be a positive addition, while also being really compatible with my quirky system and solving a couple of issues I have. I really do hope it happens, and obviously it will be on the channel when it does. Number 2, bit more definite, the sump. My current sump is just a placeholder I set up to get the moving bed up and running. I therefore want to replace it with a more permanent and larger option. The biggest issue with it at the moment is that when draining the moving bed, I have to slow down the flow as the dirty water pump can't pump it out as fast as it's coming in. Therefore, making it larger will help. I'd love to have a permanent drain and pump in place, but with no drain to have fixed access to, it's a little pie in the sky. Number 3, lilies. I've had lilies before, in version 1 of the pond, and really want them back again. They look great, provide cover from both the sun and predators, and will complete the natural pond theme. There are 2 problems though. 1, carp, which, and I'll have 4 by the time I get them, tend to batter and eat them. And 2, I want to be sure that I can both protect the fish from whatever I use as a basket container for them, and not spoil the look of the pond underwater. To solve the first problem, I'm going with a particular species of lily, the white water lily. They're quite hardy, and as Righty has shown with his pond, can survive and indeed thrive even with large and boisterous carp. The second problem I'm going to attempt to solve in a similar way to my not entirely successful plant experiment I tried in the spring. The aim of which would be to cover a low basket with liner, not a gravel one this time, which would provide a sloping cover that would both protect the fish and hide the basket. It's all in the planning stage so far, but it's definitely something I'll be trying. Number 4, speed fit. I've used hosepipe as an airline while I've been setting up both the moving bed and pond aeration, and it hasn't seemed worth having it too tidy and perfect while I've been tweaking things. By next year, however, I think I'll have it balanced, so it will be time to replace most of the hosepipe with speed fit pipe and fittings, which will not only make things tidier, but also more secure. Number 5, an electrical socket. As I'm only using one air pump, I have a free connection in the switch box. My plan is to add a second socket, which will give me flexibility with both temporary and more permanent devices. Not a big job, but a useful one. Number 6, structured feeding. This was something I had planned for this year, but many weeks of carp ill health, treatments and cautious feeding meant it never really took off. The plan is, once the pond temps are at or above 12 degrees or so, is to slowly ramp up the feeding for all the fish while performing weekly or even more often water tests. The aim being to feed as much as I can while keeping the water, and subsequently the fish, healthy. I also want to experiment with different foods, both with long-term nutrition-focused foods, but also to see how the fish respond to less appropriate food options like fishing baits and human food, bread, etc. For example, what flavours, sizes or colours trigger the keenest response. In addition, it will be interesting to see the impact that 2 more carp will have on how they feed, as there will be more competition as well as different behaviour. Number 7, stability. I think the consistency and stability are really important in pond keeping. This year, I think I've changed and tinkered too much. So for 2022, I want to keep changes to a minimum and be more consistent with cleaning, feeding, etc. That means less changes that directly impact the water and by consequence the fish, even if they would probably be positive in the long term. That's why I plan the lilies to be the only in-pond additions or changes in 2022. The secret plan will have some effect, but more of that, hopefully, in January. Other than that, I want to leave the pond as it is to mature and be stable, with any small projects like feeding being carefully monitored. Like many pond keepers, I think, I'd really like an ill health-free year for the fish, so that they can enjoy some growth and I can enjoy less worry. That all done, we're into 2023. The main objective in 2023 is the filtration and the shed it lives in. First up is the structure of the shed. The floor I made this year has worked well, but I want to add insulation to the walls and ceiling and cover with OSB sheets. The aims of which are to obviously keep things a little warmer, but also to make the shed tidier and seal up the gaps. Next is to add some lighting to the ceiling, probably using the socket I'm installing in 2022. I think being able to see what I'm doing is probably overdue. The third plan is to raise the multi-bay. Only to the height the UV currently is, so no extra work for the pump. The reason for this is to have the water level higher and consequently the multi-bay's outlet, which will in turn enable the moving bed to be deeper, which brings me, by no accident, to the fourth idea, replacing the moving bed. Making the current one was a challenge in terms of budget and size. There's little room in the shed and I was constrained by the water level in the multi-bay as to how high the moving bed could be. Raising the multi-bay will allow a deeper and larger tub, and hopefully one that won't bow out, allowing me, with luck, to increase the K Plus to closer to 100 litres. We'll see. The final plan is to make a DIY backy shower. It would be in the shed, so space will be tight, but its size will be dictated to by the flow rate to it anyway, which won't be huge, so that shouldn't really be too much of a problem. I think it would be the final piece of my filtration jigsaw and will hopefully allow me to keep things healthy for what will be bigger and more numerous fish. Which brings me, finally, to something that isn't a plan for any of the years, but is something I'm going to have to address at some point over the next 1 or 2 or 3, and that is increasing numbers of fish. As you'll know, the rudd have spawned, and I currently have about 22 fry, which for now is fine. However, depending on how many get through winter and other challenges, and possibly by next summer reach 3 to 4 inches, I really couldn't keep all of them. In addition, the rudd will probably spawn again. The carp could also spawn, depending on the sex of the new ones, and I could have a ton of fish in the pond at some point. As much as I like the idea of a multi-generational shoal of rudd, it can't be without limits. Also, if the carp do spawn, I probably wouldn't leave nature to take its course with them as I do with the rudd. Which all means I need to consider a number of things. 1. A setup to keep fry in separate from the pond. 2. How many rudd I want I'm able to keep in the pond. 3. What to do with rudd I'm not keeping. And 4. How to grow on any carp fry and what to do with them. Could I possibly have more carp? Anyway, that's it for future planning. Much of this might change, some may happen sooner or later or not at all. I'd love to hear what your plans are, how far ahead you're planning, and what you think about mine. I thought I'd give an update on the rudd. The 8 golden and 5 silver fish have had a pretty significant year, in spite of the comings and goings of other fish, and the health problems that have beset many. They've been feeding enthusiastically on the new food I've started this year, 2 mil slow sinking koi fry pellets, which have proven both really popular with them and of a size and rate of sinking that mean the rudd can easily get to them before the carp do. As I said earlier, I'm not measuring the fish this year, so cannot know for sure, but they appear bigger and certainly a little deeper. Last year they were between 5 to 6 inches. This year I'd say 6 to 7 inches, maybe bigger, but again I can't be sure. I'll find out next year. They've definitely matured, as their spawning this summer indicates. As I didn't witness them spawn, I'm not sure how many of the fish are female. Going by some missing scales on one of the silver ones, I'd guess that one is. Hopefully more are. The 5 original rudd were all golden, and it's interesting that 5 of their descendants are silver, and it will be fascinating to see how many of the current fry retain the gold colouring. My guess would be that an even larger proportion of them will be silver, but we'll have to wait and see. In addition to the silver ones, there's one rudd that is almost two-tone, mostly gold, that develops into silver towards the belly. There are some other interesting colorations. Some of the rudd are developing black patches, mostly along their back, as they get older, which their parents also did. Not sure why, although it would be advantageous in terms of being less visible from above. The rudd are fairly confident in the pond, certainly not as nervous of the carp as the crucians were, possibly because they're significantly faster than the crucians were, and faster than the carp over a short distance. That's not to say they don't defer to the carp, however. When the carp come close, the rudd make a reasonably dignified retreat. Overall, the rudd are the success of the pond this year. They came from the original 5, survived the big freeze of 2018, and now they've had fry of their own. And they remain a healthy, active, colourful contrast to the generally slower, darker yet larger carp. The new food has been a win for them, and I'm definitely continuing with it. The only downside I have to look forward to is the inevitable moving on of some of the fry, probably next year. But that's a future me problem. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. I really do appreciate it. As the carp finally seem better, I think it's almost time to do a whole video about their health, with a timeline. What I did, what worked, what didn't, what I could have done better, and what was somewhat out of my hands. Whether that's next week, I'm not sure. Definitely though, in the next couple of weeks. I'm almost close to prepping the pond for autumn, and that too will be in a future episode coming soon, although that will be dictated to by when the leaves start to fall. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.